Colleagues, please move quickly. We need to move to the next debate. Joe Robertson to move the motion. Go ahead.
I'd like to move this House has considered the cost of the increase in national insurance contributions on employers in the charity sector. The background, Ms Vaz, to this debate, of course, is the October budget presented by this government, and in particular the rise in national insurance contributions on employers, raising the rate to 15%, but also bringing down the threshold on which national insurance contributions apply from £9,100 to £5,000, therefore bringing in particularly some part-time workers who previously had not caused their employers to be subject to national insurance contributions. Now, much has been said about the impact on the economy of this rise, but less has been said about the impact on charities. So charities deliver almost £17 billion worth of public services a year. Public services and indeed civil society could not operate without charities. And I think there is a tendency to overlook the important work they do. And particularly at local government level, charities are responsible for delivering a lot of services that local government are required to deliver through contracting. Yes, I will give way.
Giving way and for securing this really important debate. The Balsam Centre is a charity in Wincanton, my constituency of Glastonbury and Somerton, that delivers some of those vital services that he was talking about, including maternal mental health support and youth counselling. And the changes in the NI changes mean that they will have to find an extra £40,000 for their additional salary costs next year. They'll have to cancel any pay increase and they'll have to operate at a reduced capacity from April. Their work relieves pressure on the NHS and on local government. So does the Honourable Member agree with me that the government must rethink the changes to the national insurance changes?
Joe Robertson.
Of course I agree with her. Yes, the government must rethink these changes. And I will go on to use examples in my own constituency, and I thank her for doing so in hers. The overall, I'll make a little progress and then I'm very happy to give way. The overall impact or cost of money taken from charities transferred into the Treasury is £1.4 billion. That's the estimate from the National Council for Voluntary Organisations. That's money being taken from charitable sources transferred into the Treasury. And I quote Sarah Ellicott, the Chief Executive of the National Council for Voluntary Organisations. These are her words, not mine. This is the biggest shock to the sector since the pandemic. Charities already juggling rising demand, escalating costs and failing funding cannot absorb an additional £1.4 billion in costs without drastic service cuts. This additional cost, for which there is no headroom in budgets to cover, will be devastating. I give way.
This forward. In Northern Ireland, some of the effects upon charities will range from £5,000 per year to £200,000 a year. The costs are extreme and they're incredibly worrying. Does the Honourable Member agree with me that charities are the backbone of local communities? I think he referred to that earlier on in his contribution. For so many across the UK, they deserve the support even more. And does he feel that this change, as I feel, on behalf of my charities in my constituency, that the guideline could ultimately be the straw that breaks the camel's back and the charities could well disappear?
Joe Robertson.
I do agree with him on both of those points, and particularly the straw that breaks the camel's back for many, and that's what charities are telling us, as he knows. And I know because I worked for a charity immediately before entering Parliament, a charity that operates in nursing and supporting carers in dementia. But the government itself knows the pressure created by the national insurance contribution rises. That's why it exempted the NHS. It exempted the NHS because it knew the impact that would be felt on healthcare, but at the same time seems to have ignored or failed to understand the contribution charities make to health and social care. I will give way.
Thank you. I'm grateful to my honourable friend and I commend him for bringing forward this debate today. Organisations like the Air Ambulance in the West Midlands that serves my constituents receives no government funding whatsoever for its daily missions. It doesn't burden the NHS financially, and yet it adds immense value to the healthcare sector. So I'd like to ask my honourable friend if he agrees with me that it's time that the Treasury actually considered giving organisations and charities such as the Air Ambulances the same exemption that they are giving to NHS trusts, hospital trusts and NHS bodies.
I do agree with her. I mean, ultimately, the government should be exempting all charities from national insurance contribution rises. But another possibility, which is much less beneficial, would be to target it at health and social care providers, charities, who are without which the NHS could not function. But I would expand it, and my ask to the Minister is to expand the exemption to all charities, not just those in health and social care. I give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful. Shooting Star and Demalza House are two children's cancer charities, hospice charities, both of which make a significant contribution effectively to the National Health Service. Is it not absolutely ludicrous that money given for charitable purposes should effectively be siphoned off to the Treasury instead of being used to provide the support for children and their families for which it is intended?
I agree with my honourable friend. Of course, it's ludicrous. This is charitable money, most of it charitable donations that is given to charities to provide valuable work, and then the Treasury is taking that money and putting it into government coffers. And some of these charities, like those in his constituency, are small charities doing valuable work, the least able to afford giving money over to national government. It's unsurprising, therefore, that 7,000 charities have signed an open letter to the Chancellor. But it's not just the increase in national insurance contributions, it's the timing of it and the combination. I'll make a little progress and then I will come to you. It is the combination of factors and the timing. All charities, most charities, are suffering from trying to raise charitable funds at this time. Yet it's at this time the government has decided to take some of those charitable funds for itself. And of course, for charities like Age UK supporting older people, it's the simultaneous impact of the withdrawal of winter fuel payments that has meant more people are using their services, and at the same time government is taking money off them.
On that point, with my honourable...
I will give way to my honourable friend, and then I will come on.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend and congratulate him on securing this important debate. You can see through the attendance on one side of the House just how important charities are to opposition parties of all sorts. We are united in opposing this, not least because those who are the most vulnerable, such as the users of citizens' advice, are likely to see those services cut. It's an £88,000 impact just on the citizens' advice service in Hull and the East Riding. And does he agree with me that the Minister needs to go back to her colleagues, needs to change direction, because no one voted for a Labour government to attack charities and the most vulnerable?
Joe Robertson.
With respect, yes, I agree with my right honourable friend. The Minister does need to, of course, go back, and that is why I secured this debate. And again, I will quote from the Chief Executive of the Charity Crisis. Increasing national insurance contributions on employers will have a dreadful impact on charities at a time when we're seeing unprecedented demand for services. Two figures here. 75% of charities are reducing or considering withdrawing from public service delivery. Well, who will pick up that shortfall? Worst case, no one will pick up where charities withdraw. Or government will have to, public sector will have to, and I'd be fairly sure it's going to cost them more than £1.4 billion to do so, and I prefer to put my trust in charities with experience in what they do than government having to put emergency measures in place because charities are forced to withdraw. 61% are likely to cut staff. The stated aim of this government is not backed by its tax policy in 3 areas in particular: health and social care, which you've already spoken much about, but also in poverty and homelessness, and also for vulnerable groups. I give way to the honourable member.
Thank the honourable member for giving
John Mill.
to his point earlier about Age UK. In my constituency of Horsham, they estimate it will cost them £150,000 per year in just my constituency to cope with this extra charge. They're not a business. They can't raise their prices. They can only cut their service. Would you agree that at a time when 1 in 5 pensioners are adjudged to be living in poverty, this is the wrong time for such a measure?
I agree with the honourable member, and of course Age UK, I think broadly speaking, operates as small charities in individual communities, and again Age UK and the Isle of Wight, where my constituency is, are also facing tens of thousands of pounds, and while on the national scale that might not seem like much money, it makes a huge difference at local level and leads inevitably to either service cuts or staff cuts. But no good can come of it. I agree with him. I will give way.
Alison Bennett.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for giving way and for bringing this debate today. And to my honourable friend, the member for Horsham's point about the additional costs hitting Age UK in West Sussex and Brighton and Hove, it's had an astonishing impact, and that combined with the increase in the real living wage is actually going to double their fundraising target for this year. That's something they can't bear, and that, combined with the cost of the cuts to the winter fuel payment, goes against the very sentiment of the budget, which was to try and prioritise the NHS. More elderly people will be and are presenting in A&E. Does the honourable member agree with me that the government needs to rethink?
I do agree with the honourable member, and I think it looks like the government doesn't understand that healthcare is not only delivered by the NHS. So when it chose to exempt the NHS from these damaging rises, it either didn't understand or had disregard for all the other providers of healthcare, without which the NHS could not function properly. And I'll give some examples before giving way to my honourable friends. Marie Curie, the charity, almost £3 million a year this will cost them. And they say without further support, critical services for the terminally ill may be scaled back. Hospices across the country, between 30 to 50 million a year. Now, the government has announced, and Mountbatten Hospice, operating in my constituency, 338,000 just for one hospice. Now, the government announced 100 million investment in hospices just before Christmas. That's over 2 years, so 50 million a year. That's merely giving back broadly what they've already taken. And it's money targeted at capital spending when hospices are telling me that their main pressure is revenue. Exactly. So it's government taking revenue from them and giving it back, provided they spend it on capital. And clearly, they're not going to give money to all hospices, but they are going to take money from all hospices. That seems inevitable. I give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you, and I do congratulate the honourable gentleman on bringing this important debate. And just on the matter of hospices, the Heart of Kent Hospice in my constituency do amazing work caring for families at a time of crisis. But the government changes to NICs and the national living wage will cost the charity over £200,000 per annum. And does my honourable friend agree with me that the government's approach is undermining many hospices, damaging the vital services they provide, and ultimately putting more pressure on the NHS?
Robertson.
I agree. If you put pressure on other health providers and social care providers, it inevitably leads to pressure on the NHS. And she hits the nail absolutely on the head. in those comments that she makes, and I thank her for them. Carers Trust, £3 million a year, the cost of just this rise. That's not their tax bill. That's just the bill from this rise in the budget. Stroke Association, 2.1 million over 2 years. Teenage Cancer Trust, 300,000. But it's not just in health and social care. Also charities tackling poverty and homelessness. But the Labour government says it's its aim, it was in its manifesto, that it would develop a new cross-party strategy to put Britain back on track to end homelessness. What good is a strategy when it's stripping £60 million from those charities, trying to do what the government wants them to do? The homelessness charity Crisis says it will cost an additional £750,000. And here's the point, with little or no time to prepare. This announcement was made just a few months before it will kick in. And they say it's likely to lead to a reduction in frontline services. I'm going to mention a few other charities. Single Homeless Project, 650,000. And Rick Henderson, the CEO of Homeless Link, says, and again, his words, not mine, we're desperately worried about closures of homelessness services, leaving thousands without support. This NI increase could be the final nail in the coffin. These are not my words, they're not words of politicians, they are the words of charity leaders up and down the United Kingdom. And it's also charities supporting other vulnerable people and also charities supporting women and girls. Labour pledged to halve violence against women and girls in their manifesto, but chief executives of 7 charities, including Victim Support and Rape Crisis, have warned this could result in them losing staff, closing waiting lists, and ultimately closing the doors to some vulnerable victims of crime. That's the result of this budget national insurance rise. I will give way.
Sasha Eastwood.
I thank the Honourable Member for bringing this issue today, and I agree completely with him insofar as violence against women and girls in Northern Ireland is at crisis levels. It's one of the most dangerous places in Europe to be a woman, and we have women and girls who have lost their lives already this year to violence. Would you agree with me that if the government are serious, and I believe they are, about tackling the issue of violence against women and girls, that surely this increase flies in the face of everything we are trying to achieve in terms of ending violence against women and girls?
Joe Robertson.
I do agree with her, and I would like to share her optimism that the government does intend to make improvements in this area. But this debate is a second chance for them to go away, come back, and provide relief to all charities, but particularly those that are operating in what might be called emergency services, because nobody else is doing what these charities are doing. I spoke to a journalist earlier today, and he was involved in the criminality and repulsive scandal in Rotherham, and he said when he went there, it was charities who were providing the services. There wasn't anyone else doing it. Yet these are the groups who are having money taken off them in order to fund government. I quote, again, Women's Aid represents 175 member organisations across England, or is a conglomerate of 175 member organisations. And it says the national insurance contribution rises will effectively negate gift aid. So the government is giving a tax relief through gift aid and then taking it back to the budget increase rises. I will.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member and for securing this debate. I think we can all potentially suggest what the Government is going to say today and that they are not going to change their mind. So surely we should be ensuring that the Government do other things to support. One of the things they could do is support my private member's bill on removing the charity lotteries cap, which would allow charities to raise more money but at no cost to the taxpayer. Does he agree with me?
I agree, although I do also, perhaps a little bit more optimistic than the honourable member, that the government might go away. They might not make the promise today, but I think there is an opportunity to go away, and even if they might not want to admit it in black and white, they can provide financial relief to all charities. But I congratulate her on her bill. And I will just say locally, again, I'm grateful to members who've come here and talked about their own constituencies. Local charity Aspire in my constituency are currently building for the first time on the Isle of Wight accommodation specifically for vulnerable women. And now the government want £27,000 from them. Community Action on the Isle of Wight does amazing things, and again does a lot of contracted services for the Isle of Wight Council. Government want £45,000 for them, from them. The employment allowance will offset £5,000 of it, but the government will tell you that employment allowance is what they're giving back. Small returns on the money they are taking. I could say a lot more about all the other charities that operate in sports and arts and live music and culture. Clearly there are time constraints, but this is not just the charities in the sectors I've been talking about today, although I think they are the ones, broadly speaking, who are operating at the coalface that the public sector tends not to be able to deal with directly, or else frankly they wouldn't exist.
I think the honourable member was exactly right to draw particular attention to hospices, given that the House is debating shortly the assisted dying bill. And I've heard from constituents that if we are to introduce that, they would like also to see proper investment in palliative care. So does he agree with me that this is another reason why national insurance needs to be prioritised for hospices?
I do agree with him, and he illustrates the point perfectly that government's stated aims are not backed up by their tax decisions. So if government wants better palliative care, and I hope that it does, it shouldn't be taking money away from hospices. It shouldn't be taking money away from charities like Marie Curie, who operate in and around social care, end of life. And I think that's a point he makes very, very well, and I thank him for it. Before finishing, I would like to again quote from the interim CEO of Refuge, that says, she says, the violence against women and girls sector is already under immense financial pressure. Not only did the budget fail to include detail about how much funding has been set aside to tackle violence against women and girls, the government's plans to increase national insurance contributions for employers could have dire repercussions for charities. So my ask from the government is this: extend that exemption that it has given for the NHS and public bodies. Extend that exemption to charities. It is not difficult. There is no lack of clarity about what a charity is. Nobody will wish to beat the government for making a sensible decision for charities. There are some alternative options, but that is plainly the only ask which will really deal with the problem. The alternative options are to provide some form of alternative relief, but it should be felt by all charities. Thirdly, to target relief to specific sectors if it cannot go so far as to relieve all charities. And we've heard particularly about those sectors today, like those operating in poverty and homelessness and tackling violence towards women and girls, and health and social care. At the very least, do an impact assessment. There has been no impact assessment done on the impact of this tax increase on the charity sector. That must be the most basic ask. There can be no good reason not to do it. And finally, to go back and rethink its whole approach to taxation on charities to help deliver, not hinder, its stated aims.
Can I ask honourable members, you can see the time, we'll have to take wind-ups at about 8 minutes past 5. A number of members have put their names down to speak. So could you just stand if you want to speak and we can work out timings? So I'm reliably informed that each person will get 1 minute, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop you after 1 minute. Obviously, the member in charge, this is his debate, and therefore he can take as long as he likes, and I think that he's taken quite a few interventions. So I'm going to call Blake Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be really quick. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the member for Isle of Wight East for securing such an important debate. And I have to say, I'm absolutely astonished that so few members have attended from the opposite benches. Yeah. It wasn't so long ago that they were community champions seeking election. In Mid-Bedfordshire, our charities do absolutely fantastic work to help keep our area the special place that it is. In particular, I want to talk about the Green Sand Trust. I was pleased to visit them recently, and they do some absolutely fantastic work in the community and also supporting environmental improvements within Mid-Bedfordshire. And I was deeply concerned to hear about the impact that this government's job tax will have on them. £100,000 extra on their staffing costs next year, with no efficiencies that they can find and no extra income that they can raise. That means they'll have to cut back staff next year to make ends meet. And that means a reduced service for everyone, a huge loss to our local environment and our green spaces.
Could you bob each time you want in between so we can get a clearer idea? Abdeslam Mohammed.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve and congratulate the honourable member for securing today's debate. As the former Chief Exec of a community regeneration organisation, I speak from direct experience of working with charities on the ground. However, whilst it's nice that the Conservatives care today about charities, this hasn't been the case previously. The cuts started right at the beginning of the Conservatives' time in office with their big society policy, which was, in my experience, just an underhand means of implementing cuts. I know this because, like many organisations, myself working for the one that I did, we spent year after year managing cuts after cuts. Local vital community services were forced to close or reduce in size. Chair, I welcome the government's commitment to resetting the relationship with the third sector and to rebuilding a new partnership through the Civil Society Covenant. I'm also pleased that the government's policy statements on local government finances will provide a multi-year financial settlement and adjust the funding formula to local governments to rebalance funding where it's most needed. These measures will be welcomed by charities. However, I am concerned about the impact of the NI increase to organisations. Okay.
Marie Goldman.
This really important topic to this place, and it's a pleasure to serve. I just, very short of time, so I just wanted to bring out a couple of facts from that for charities that serve my own constituency of Chelmsford. We've got Farley Hospice, who do what the name suggests. They do incredible work. They have to fundraise for most of the money that they have, and they will need to cover an extra £250,000 in addition to the current deficit budget that they are operating under. Now, that equates to the cost of 5 registered nurses or the direct running costs of their children's bereavement service. Now, I wonder which one the government would prefer them to cut. I'm really, I could go on about loads of different charities. I've got 20 seconds left, and I just want to say that I'm so incredibly disappointed by this government with this, because they must have known the impact that this was going to have on the charity sector, and to choose to ignore them and to do it without any compensation, without talking to them first, I think it's just disgraceful, and I really do want to know what the government is going to do to fix it.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Ms Vaz, and I thank the member for bringing this debate. Prior to the election, the new government had made a promise to the British people not to put up taxes on working people, and I'm proud that they haven't done. Everybody in this country, however, has known for years that the state was failing on its own terms. I spent a year prior to the election as my party's candidate, and I canvassed every single street in my Southport constituency. I know pretty much every dodgy garden gate and letterbox in the whole town. The one complaint I heard over and over and over again was that nothing works properly in this country anymore. And the reason nothing works properly in this country anymore is because of the economic legacy of that party opposite. GP appointments, train journeys, streetlights, social care, none of it works. We had to do something to put this country's economic policy on an even keel, and this is what we had to do. And I'll take no lectures from anybody over there who'll oppose it.
Shakib Adam.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve in the thank the honourable member for bringing this very important debate to the hall. I'd like to be a little bit more generous and say that this was an unintended consequence of the budget, because it is unravelling very quickly, and the charity sector, as my honourable member said, are going to cease to exist very quickly. Jasmine House, who provides support for women of who have been victims of sexual violence, who are having to wait 5 to 6 years for a court appearance, these charity was given, I've got a 2-year waiting list to provide support for them. Last year when I spoke to them, they were intending to expand. Now they are going to more or less shut down because they just don't have the money. It's going to cost them too much to continue operating. Another charity which is very close to my professional career is the Vista, which provides, it's a 170-year-old charity which provides support for partially sighted and blind individuals in the city of Leicester. It's going to cost them an extra £25,000 a year, and what they are calling for is an exemption for social care providers and charitable organisations, or for ring-fencing funds to be provided to local governments to cover the costs in full. Thank you.
Rankin.
Happening now as we debate, senior members of the Thames Valley Air Ambulance are working out how to cover the £130,000 extra bill for the jobs tax next year. They're an outstanding resource for Berkshire, Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire, and they work exclusively for the NHS and save the NHS many more times than this jobs tax will raise. Thames Hospice in my constituency, £300,000. And once you add in the effect of the minimum wage and matching the nursing settlement, they're going to have to find well over £500,000 next year just to stand still. The government says it wants to help the NHS, but in fact its budget is doing the opposite. Why is the government doing this? Is it an accidental oversight or a misunderstanding of how the sector works? I call on the government to rethink its approach and fix this.
For securing the debate. There was a reference made to unintended consequences of the government making this decision, but actually they're not unintended consequences. It's a dereliction of duty because they didn't do the impact assessments that they should have done to understand what they would do to our charity sector. Talking about my own constituency of Newbury, I recently visited West Berkshire Mencap. And as a result of the financial pressures, they will need to find an additional £163,000 to cover national insurance contributions, and their agency costs are projected to rise by approximately 12%. I also recently met with Rachel Peters, the Chief Executive of Volunteer Centre West Berkshire, which last year provided advice and support to 403 individuals on volunteering. And she expressed grave concern that the impacts of these changes will have in Newbury, with staffing costs alone projected to rise by 18%. And overall, within the charities that she represents, an additional £387,000 will need to be found next financial year, with hardly any time to plan.
Thank you. Peter Fortune.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to my honourable friend for bringing the debate forward. I want to speak very quickly about the impacts this jobs tax will have on my community. One excellent charity working in the constituency of Bromley and Biggin Hill is South East London Mind. They face a £190,000 increase in their tax bill. That's the equivalent of hiring 5 mental health advisors who could support 1,000 people a year. But instead of working hard fundraising or reworking NHS contracts to expand, they'll be doing it to pay tax and, in all likelihood, to do less. And this isn't a unique case. Another fantastic charity working in Bromley and Biggin Hill is Aurora Nexus, which employs 240 people right across London, supporting people with autism and learning disabilities. They face a £194,000 tax grab. Every member here will know of a local charity that Labour's jobs tax will hit hard. This is a poor policy and, quite frankly, an attack on the most vulnerable in our society.
Seamus Logan.
Thank you, Mrs Vaz. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship again today. And I thank the honourable member for the Isle of Wight East for securing this important debate and for his excellent contribution. If the Labour government thought that the national insurance controversy would die away as we moved into 2025, I'm afraid they're going to be very disappointed. They have offered Scotland an additional £300 million to meet the additional costs, whereas the Scottish Government estimate that the actual cost is in the region of £750 million. This past week, 48 organisations from across Civic Scotland have joined with First Minister John Swinney and COSLA President Shona Morrison to call on the Chancellor to cover the additional costs and to ensure this is extended to the full range of organisations which deliver public services. They are all facing a huge rise in their costs. According to the Scottish Government, the UK Government didn't even bother to consult with them ahead of this change. How is this change contributing to growth? It's reducing services for vital support at a dark time in people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Vicky Slade.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Pleasure to serve under chairmanship. There's 328 charities in my constituency of Mid Dorset and North Poole, like Safe Partnership, who run out of Wareham, putting safe rooms and securing properties for people who've been victims of domestic abuse. Not one of those people has to pay for that service, but that service is paid by councils, who of course are not going to be funding the additional cost of those commissioned services. £5.5 million is the cost of the additional employers' NICs for the commission services in adults, children's and adult care in BCP alone. Becky, who runs Winwood Day Opportunities in my constituency, said that feeling in adult social care is bleak. The people we support do not deserve to be the ones who receive lower quality services through no fault of their own. And Mark Powell, who's the Chief Exec of Diversibility, said, we celebrate our 70th birthday of our charity this year. Phyllis Edwards, who founded it, wanted to protect children with disabilities. We are concerned we will not make our 70th birthday.
Thank you. Victoria Collins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate the honourable member for securing this debate. The government's proposed changes do pose a severe threat to vital charities that are at the heart of our communities. Again and again we've heard that. Age UK and Hertfordshire have calculated that these rises will impose an additional cost of £85,000 per annum, and combined with unexpected increases in operational costs pushes the total to closer to £250,000. Higher national insurance contributions mean increased costs, reduced capacity to hire and retain staff, and ultimately fewer resources to deliver the services our communities rely on. The wonderful team at the Hospice of St Francis in Berkhamsted shared with me the heartbreaking experience of having to turn away people from their health and wellbeing service, their nursing support and their at-home support. This will only get worse. Time and again, charities have spoken to me about how the government's snap decision undervalues their essential work. Work such as supporting COVID-19 vaccine rollout, picking up pieces after winter fuel allowance was cut, and gaps left by the last Conservative government with our NHS and public service in crisis. I urge the government to reconsider these national insurance rises for charities.
Thank you. Edward Morello.
Congratulate the honourable member on securing this debate. I want to highlight the impact of the national insurance rise on just two West Dorset charities. Wellmore Hospice Care already subsidises 60% of its NHS commissioned care through fundraising. It will have to raise an additional £600,000 next year. Julia's House, which provides end-of-life care to sick children, gets just 8% of its income from state funding. It will have to raise a nearly £250,000 next year as a result of these changes. Charities like Wellmar and Julia's House play a critical role in alleviating pressure on the NHS. They provide care in the community, reduce avoidable hospital admissions and support families in their darkest hours. Their work aligns with the government's priorities of shifting care out of hospitals into community settings, yet this policy actively undermines their abilities to do so. Wellmar and Julia embody selflessness and service. By exempting hospices from national insurance rise, we can protect their critical work and ensure they continue to provide comfort.
Thank you. And last but not least, Tom Gordon.
And thank you to the honourable member for bringing this debate forward. I'd want to just quickly mention two charities that I've interacted with in my constituency of Harrogate and Knaresborough. The first of which is one which provides support to unpaid carers who are now facing £90,000 in additional employer NICs, which will completely pull the rug out from underneath them and have a massive impact to people providing those services to loved ones. And secondly, Harrogate is home to one of two police treatment centres in the entirety of the UK. They help rehabilitate police who've been injured in the course of their duties, and we know from every pound spent it saves a taxpayer £3.80 in rehabilitation and mental health and wellbeing. Obviously the impact of NICs on them is going to be huge. They're going to see £160,000 worth of employer NICs passed on to them. So it's really clear that while the government is hoping to raise some tax in the process of this, it's going to end up costing it a lot more in the long run, and they need to rethink it.
Thank you. I think we can squeeze one more. Clive Jones.
Thank you very much. Ms Vaz, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and thank you to the honourable member for securing the debate. A number of charities in my constituency of Wokingham, the Cowshed, First Days and Citizens Advice have been really disadvantaged by these national insurance charges, one of them by up to £16,000 a year. The government could have been bold by taxing banks, online gambling and social media giants to raise more money. Can the Minister answer this simple question? Is she content with putting bankers' bonus bonuses first, instead of debt advisors and support for people facing evictions, homelessness and genuine need.
Can I thank honourable members? Everyone who wanted to speak has done. I now call on the Lib Dem spokesperson, Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to serve, and I congratulate the honourable member for Isle of Wight East on securing this very important debate. I believe I have up to 5 minutes to make some remarks, which feels positively luxurious in the context of the canter that we've just had, so I'll kick back as I think about what to say. Madam Chair, I've been really struck by the examples that colleagues have given today. We've heard a number of charities named from a number of different constituencies, various Age UK branches, charities that support survivors of domestic violence, particularly supporting women and children, ambulances, MinCap, Mind, physical rehabilitation, and various volunteer and advice centres. But the one sector that has been mentioned, or the one type of charity that's been mentioned more than any other, has been hospices. Almost every single member who has spoken today or made an intervention has made reference to a hospice in their area, and that surely should send a strong message to the government about the amount of support in this House on a cross-party basis there is for our hospice sector, and why we want to see more from this government in that regard. As the MP for St Albans, I've heard, like others have, about charities in my area. One particular hospice, Rennie Grove, says that this potential changes will have a potential increased cost of about £250,000. A doctor working in palliative care in another hospice that serves my constituents says that the decision not to exempt hospices is, and I quote, nothing short of devastating. A trustee from a local mental health charity says that these cuts that may need to be made will result in the increase in demand for NHS-run services. And of course, we all know that National Age UK has also said that this will put an intolerable strain on their organisation as well. The fact of the matter is, Madam Chair, that we know the government has a terrible inheritance from the previous government. We know that. But there are choices to be made, and there are different choices that could have been made. The government says that this national insurance hike will result in an additional tax revenue of around £25 billion per year. But the OBR clearly states that after allowing for behaviour changes in response to the tax, like reducing pay, and once public sector employers are compensated, this will only raise revenue closer to £10 billion. Instead of raising national insurance contributions on small businesses, health and care providers and charities, the government could have instead raised that same amount of money through much fairer tax changes. For example, we Liberal Democrats have proposed reversing the Conservative cuts that were handed to the big banks, increasing the digital services tax to 6%, doubling the rate of remote gaming duty paid by online gambling companies, and it could have induced a fairer reform of capital gains tax, so that the 0.1% of ultra-wealthy individuals would pay their fair share, whilst keeping things the same or cutting tax for other capital gains taxpayers. So there were other choices, Madam Chair, that could have been made. Like other members in this debate, I would urge the government to think again about what they can do, particularly to restrict the impact this is going to have on our charity sector. The fact of the matter is that the national insurance contribution rise is unnecessary when alternative tax-raising avenues are available, as I've just set out. It is self-defeating because in many cases it will put more pressure on the NHS, and fundamentally it is unfair. The reason it is unfair is because it will hit the charities that are supporting some of the most vulnerable people in our societies. These charities are the glue that hold our societies together, and unfortunately we're going to see their services slashed.
We might be expecting a vote, but I'll call the opposition spokesperson, Sakib Bhatti.
Thank you, Ms Vaz. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I congratulate the Honourable Member for Isle of Wight East for securing this important debate. He made a passionate speech, and may I be the first on record to say that I think he'll have a long and fruitful career in this House. And perhaps, I hope that isn't the kiss of death I've just given to him. But as the member for Right Honourable Friend for Beverley and Holderness actually said, the strength of feeling in this House can be demonstrated by the turnout for this debate. And I thank every member who's contributed. Charities play a part in our lives, providing critical support to individuals who are facing poverty, illness and injustice. And one of the many privileges that I have as a Member of Parliament for Meriden and Solihull East, that I have also many fantastic charities in the local area. And it's always inspiring, wherever those volunteers come from, to meet those volunteers who do so much to support people year in, year out. In my own constituency, I have the Coalbridge Trust, who strive to get more people into work, improve health and tackle the effects of loneliness. I have the Lily May Foundation, who set up to help support parents who suffer the unimaginable trauma of baby loss. I had the privilege of jumping out of a plane for them not so long ago. And I also have the fantastic Lily's Tea Parlour in Chelmsford Wood, who help struggling people by offering warm food, drink and a safe space. Along with some of the great local charities that I have in my constituency, like many members, I also have HoC and Marie Curie, and my honourable friend made the case for the challenges that they face, and they will be facing as a result of this budget. Supported by an army of volunteers, these organisations are enormously important features in our high streets, in our towns and in our society. Ms Vaz, on a national level, the UK is one of the most generous nations when it comes to charitable giving. Our charities are a huge source of pride for people in this country, and members across the House must always continue to come to Parliament to do all they can to stand up for the UK's charitable sector. The country's charitable spirit can be seen by the fact that the British public donated an estimated £13.9 billion to charity in the last year. Similarly, in our communities, local people gather regularly to take part in charity bake sales, sports fixtures and watch performances where ticket costs are donated to local charities. In some respects, some of the nation's favourite cultural pastimes are deeply intertwined with supporting our charities. And there is no doubt that these charities bring all of us together. But in spite of this, our charities are under threat. I've also been contacted by a number of charities about the impact of this budget. For example, local mental health charity Birmingham Mind told me that the rise, combined with current financial pressures, presents serious challenges for charities like ours. The brain injury charity Headway contacted me to estimating that the proposed charity will push up the charity's costs by tens of thousands of pounds and will force them to reduce services, potentially putting employees at risk of redundancy or reduced days. The Birmingham-based Services for Education, run by their formidable Chief Executive Sharon Bell, wrote to me saying that the impact of national insurance changes will hit them the hardest, unfairly so. And she paints a very concerning picture about how they'll be forced to limit fantastic services that they offer because of this unprecedented cost. When the Chancellor delivered her budget of broken promises, she did exactly what she promised during the election that she wouldn't do. She significantly raised employer national insurance. But what's even more concerning is the devastating effect that this has had on the charity sector. Just a day after the budget, over 7,000 charities came together to sign an open letter coordinated by the National Council for Voluntary Organisations, warning that the sector's increased national insurance costs would amount to £1.4 billion a year. They all called on the Chancellor to either exempt or reimburse charities for these additional costs. And let me tell the Minister, the impact is already being felt, and it is dire. Over Christmas, the chief executives of 5 domestic abuse charities made it clear that increased national insurance would force them to cut services, run down reserves, and even make redundancies. This will have a catastrophic impact on the safety of vulnerable women and girls. So I'd like to ask the Minister, has she had discussions with the Minister for Women and Equalities about the possible impact that this could have for the women in this country? Has she spoken to the Chancellor? And where is that impact assessment? Over 110 chief executives of homelessness charities in England have warned that these changes could cost the sector between £50 and £60 million. Can the Minister give cast iron assurances that the number of homeless people, especially over this cold and wet winter, will not lose vital support because of this unprecedented rise in NI contributions? In opposition, we voted to exempt charities from the additional costs of NI increases, and I regret that a staggering 348 Labour members voted against this amendment, which will have a far-reaching impact on charities that provide essential services. So can the Minister also confirm, can she give certainty that this Chancellor's job tax won't have a negative impact on charities? And will she can she be certain that the Chancellor won't be coming back for more?
Stephanie Peacock.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Ms Vaz, and I'd like to congratulate the Honourable Member for the Isle of Wight East for securing this debate, and I thank members from across the House for their contributions. As the Minister for Civil Society, I have seen firsthand the huge contribution charities and voluntary groups make to our country, and as the MP for Barnsley South, by working directly with local groups, I have seen the impact they have in my own area. As part of the autumn budget, the Government took a number of difficult decisions on tax, welfare and spending to fix the public finances, fund public services and restore economic stability. In her open letter to the voluntary sector on this issue, the Chancellor stated that raising the rate of employer national insurance contributions was one of the most difficult decisions in the budget. I will address the specific point around the change to national insurance alongside some of the questions and issues raised in the debate before discussing the wider support that the Government provides to the sector. The Government recognises the need to protect the smallest businesses and charities, which is why we have more than doubled the employment allowance from £5,000 to £10,500. This means that more than half of employers, including charities with NI liabilities, will either gain or see no change next year. In addition, we are expanding the eligibility of the employment allowance by removing the £100,000 eligibility threshold to simplify and reform employer NIs so that all eligible employers now benefit. Almost all charities are eligible for the employment allowance now, as outlined in the HMT guidance. These changes would mean that a small to medium-sized charity could employ up to 4 full-time workers on the national living wage and pay no employer NI, to share one example. I will.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. Would she agree with me that if it does turn out, as I think colleagues across the House fear, that it will cost the NHS more to bring this in than it actually gains, that if that were to prove to be the case, and I know the Minister is not personally responsible for this initiative, that it would be worth reviewing it in future?
Well, as the Honourable Gentleman makes clear in his intervention, I'm not responsible for this specific policy, but I will reflect that point to the Treasury. Employers, including charities, will still continue to benefit from employer NI reliefs, including for hiring those under 21s and apprentices under 25 where eligible. I am aware, however, of the concerns of the voluntary community and social enterprise sector about the impact these changes will have on their organisations. I acknowledge that the last few years have been difficult for voluntary and community sector organisations, many of which have seen a rise in demand for their services while dealing with increased financial pressures themselves. After the last 14 years, where the state at every level has been cut back, more demand has been placed on charities. Indeed, in my own local authority saw some of the worst cuts in the country, despite being one of the areas of greatest need. So I completely appreciate the role charities have played during this time. The simple reality is that this situation cannot be reversed overnight. To grow our economy and our country, tough decisions do have to be taken, and I appreciate that is difficult. I have met with representatives, and I will give way, yes.
For giving way. She mentions a number of mitigations for charities, and you've said that you think virtually all charities will benefit from these mitigations. So where is the government actually obtaining its resources to fill the public finances hole then?
Minister. I didn't quite catch all of that, but I said half of charities will either stay the same or gain from the changes, but happy to discuss with him after the debate or write to him if I've misunderstood the point he was making. Now, I've met with representatives from the sector to specifically discuss these NI changes on more than one occasion. They have put forward many of the same arguments and questions as honourable members have today, and I have in turn shared those with the Treasury. Now, I know a number of specific causes and sectors have been raised as part of this debate, and in the time available I'd like to address some of them now. And of course, individual departments will continue to provide direct funding and support for specific causes and areas. Firstly, as has been spoken about a number of times, most hospices are charitable independent organisations, and as announced by the Department for Health and Social Care, the sector is set to receive a £100 million boost alongside a further £26 million for children and young people's hospices. Clearly this will help with financial pressures. This, of course, sits alongside some of the other actions taken by this government, including £880 million increase to social care grant and an additional £233 million of funding on homelessness to help prevent rises in the number of families in temporary accommodation and to prevent rough sleeping. The Home Office are working to agree decisions on their wider budget in support of the ambition to halve violence against women and girls, and they will communicate this as soon as possible. To answer the opposition spokesperson's point, I have a cross-government meeting on violence against women tomorrow morning. I will give way, yes.
I'm sorry to intrude on the Honourable Lady's time. The extension of the Children's Hospices grant, as I understand it, is an extension, but it won't meet the costs of national insurance on children's hospices. Would she ask the Treasury to clarify that and, if necessary, discuss it with the executives of the children's hospice movement?
Well, I know the huge work that Children's Hospices do, and I've done a lot of work with Bluebell Wood in South Yorkshire. I will take the points that the Honourable Gentleman makes, I'll reflect them, and the relevant department will write to him after this debate. Honourable members will, of course, appreciate that a number of these topics and matters fall outside of my department. I will give way, yes.
Thank you, Minister. The party opposites have been very clear that they want tax cuts. They've been less clear on what public services they'd cut to pay for them. Maybe the Minister might wish to reflect on that.
Minister.
I appreciate that point, and I think the bottom line is we have been very clear we want economic stability, and the money does have to come from somewhere. It's tax, it's borrowing, or it's cuts, and that is a very clear choice. So to conclude on those different points of the different issues that have been raised in this debate, members will appreciate that they fall outside of my department, but I will reflect the points across the House that have been made to the relevant departments after this debate. The government will continue to support the sector in a number of other ways. Through the tax system, the government also provides support to charities through a range of reliefs and exemptions, including reliefs for charitable giving. The tax reliefs available to charities are a vital element in supporting charitable causes across the UK, with more than £6 billion in charitable reliefs provided to charities, community sports clubs and their donors in 23-24. The biggest I've taken a number of interventions, and just in the interest of time I'm going to make some progress. The biggest individual reliefs provided are gift aid at £1.6 billion and business rates relief at nearly £2.4 billion. My department also supports the voluntary and community sector, particularly through the delivery of direct grant funding, delivering the £26 million VCSE energy efficiency scheme, which helps organisations with capital energy efficiency measures. That is still underway, as the Social Enterprise Boost Fund, which delivers grants and peer support for emerging social enterprises, and the Know Your Neighbourhood Fund, focused on increasing volunteering and tackling loneliness. Alongside this, the DCMS sponsors the National Lottery Community Fund, which is the largest non-government funder of voluntary and community organisations across the UK. During 23-24, the National Lottery Community Fund made grant awards totalling over £900 million, 84% of which were under £10,000, with the majority supporting grassroots organisations. My department is also focused on developing other funding support sources for the sector. This includes establishing a stronger, more ambitious partnership with the impact economy, such as unlocking the multi-million-pound potential of the Dormant Assets Scheme. This includes making charitable giving as easy and compelling as possible, building on the estimated £13.9 billion that the UK public donated to charity last year. And my officials are also working to deliver the VCSE Contract Readiness Programme to help improve the capability of the VCSE organisations when bidding for public contracts. Now, the voluntary and community sector plays an important role across all areas of public life up and down the country, as we have heard from members across the House today. As the Minister for Civil Society, I have seen firsthand the work charities and social enterprise do. Since being appointed, I've held a number of visits, meetings and roundtables with charities and voluntary organisations across the UK, from Leeds to Stoke, Huntingdon to Brent. And I'm committed to continuing that engagement with charities and voluntary groups up and down the country, especially as we continue to develop a framework for the new civil society covenant that will reset the relationship between civil society and government. We've heard a number of examples today of the brilliant work of charities that the charities do and that volunteers do. I thank them for the work, and I thank honourable members for their contributions today.
Wind up. Joe Robertson.
I thank the Minister for coming here to address the arguments that have been made, particularly as it was not a set of decisions made by her personally or indeed her department. And I thank her for assuring those here in this debate that she will go back and make strong representations to her colleagues. There is probably no option other than to do so, given the strength of feeling she's heard from particularly opposition benches today. But I would say there is no compelling argument, and it's not her fault, Chair, that there is no compelling argument that money had to be taken from charities in order to deliver the government's objectives. And I would urge her to say to the Chancellor, please give charities their money back. This is their money, give it back. So I beg to move that this House has considered the impact of national insurance rises on charities.
Thank you. The question, and thank you all, to all honourable members. The question is that this House has considered the impact of changes to employers' national insurance contributions on the charity sector. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.